All right, so thank you all for coming and I'll thank you in advance for your attention anyway. And can you hear me in the back? Yeah. Is that working okay? I will do my best to project. Okay, my name's Steve Crimi. My wife Chris and I, we have a farm called Philosophy Farm in Mars Hill, where we do biodynamics, we do permaculture, we have fibers, some of which you may have seen on the table downstairs. We have goats, we have sheep, and we did for a while practice the Agnihotra. And I wrote a bio, so if you want to read that, you're welcome to it. It sounds a lot better. You get very impressed with yourself sometimes. You say, wow, he sounds really interesting. So most of us know better. So I'm going to talk about a couple different things. I'm going to try to see how we work this out. We're going to talk about Agnihotra, take a break, come back and talk about Alan Chadwick and biodynamics, and a little bit about the bees and colony collapse disorder. But actually, and in your handouts, you have something I wrote on Agnihotra, which will contain most of what I'm going to talk about. And then a little article by Gunther Hauck, who's a wonderful biodynamic beekeeper on colony collapse disorder, better known in circles as CCD. Gunther Hauck's book is How to Save the Honeybee, is that it? I think, right? I haven't read it yet, but I do intend to. But he's terrific on this whole topic. So, and then for get the business portion of the program out of the way, there are biodynamic preps available here. And then we also recently formed a publishing company called Logo Sophia to get out this book of biodynamic talks on Alan Chadwick. So, and then there are a couple of little pamphlets out there. One also is Alan Chadwick talking about bees, and it has a CD in it, which is really terrific because Alan Chadwick was a trained Shakespearean actor. Craig studied under Alan. He's still working it out. And Alan, you have to hear him. Alan is a transmission when you hear him speaking. So there's a CD available of him talking about bees. Okay, so we're going to move now, I guess, this part of the program. We've been talking about a whole bunch of different problems and scenarios and atmospheric conditions and the various responses we have via gardening or via biogeometrical tools. So what Agnihotra is actually a response to the same thing, but it's a very ancient method. So what did the ancients do without certain tools? And specifically, we're speaking about the ancient Vedic people. So what you just saw before lunch was a very small Vedic householder ritual or sacrifice. And loosely, Agnihotra is this ritual that you just saw. Agni is the fire god, right? So it's correlate with the Latin ignis, ignition. And Hotra essentially means ritual. Now the ash from that ritual is used in something called Homa therapy. So, and Homa therapy is using the ash for either medicinal or agricultural purposes. And like I said, that's all in your handout. And so this all goes back to this, and this is, I'll keep the Sanskrit to a minimum, but it goes back to this word yajna, which is sacrifice, which actually even correlates to the Latin sacri ficare, to make sacred, is what the word sacrifice actually, back in its origins. But yajna is the word for sacrifice. So to understand what the Vedic people were doing with sacrifice, you have to understand what the original sacrifice is, okay? So what is the original sacrifice? Well, the original sacrifice is one that we can really never know, because the sacrifice of the one into the many. It's the sacrifice of the absolute into manifestation. Right? So the absolute comes down, divides into first male and female, and then into the rest of the world at 10,000 things, as the Tao Te Ching says, right? So that's the initial sacrifice. Now we can only, as humans, get so close to that experience, but the Vedic seers would ride that, and that particular sacrifice happens on a number of different levels. One of them is the Mahayuga, the great spans of time where the whole universe dissolves and then something else is reborn. But it also happens moment by moment. Every moment we are continuously blinking in and out of the one. I think Andrew even said something like that before. And just to bring it home, most of you know this, it gets represented geometrically. The one is represented by a circle or a sphere. And then how do you get from the sphere into the rest of everything? Well, it starts off with this duplication, and then the Vesica in the middle. It's almost a Da Vincian circle, right? not quite. But anyway, so the one goes into the two, and then through this womb or matrix, which is the Vesica, everything else comes through, and then you're able to get all your different kind of roots, your root 3 and all that kind of stuff. And some of this is second nature to a lot of you, and it's not important, but you see you're starting from the one and moving into the many, and that's one way to do it. Another model that you can use is the musical model. Okay, so you'd start with a note, and then, but you can't do anything with just one note, right? You can just say the one note over and over again. Of course, when you divide, the basic musical miracle is if you take a string and you divide it in half, you get the same note an octave higher, right? Everybody follows that? Everybody familiar with that concept? If you're not, that's the basic miracle of music, that you take any string length, guitar string, you divide it in half, you get the same note an octave higher. If you double it, you get the same note an octave lower. So this is the invariant miracle of music. So, but if you have, so now you have, essentially you have a male and female, you have the matrix of the whole octave, but you just have the same note, right? You just have the octave. So then you have to use different string length ratios, right, in order to get more notes, right? So you have to use a 2/3 to get a perfect fourth, 3/4 to get a perfect fifth, if I'm not mistaken. So in other words, now you've got the octave, and from that one octave, you've got Beethoven's ninth, as well as the Sex Pistols. So, But one of the most amazing things that no one ever talks about, though I think I found it in Michael Schneider's book, all right? Very few people know. We've been singing this, right, since we were little kids. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si. Si, originally it was si, do. Okay? Well, originally, the whole cosmos was implied in this, because it is. When you divide the octave, when you divide it harmonically, you are creating a universe. So, Regina, C-O-E-L-I, Caeli. Maybe it's easier if I do it this way. This is not a left-handed world. Is it lactus or lactea? Apologize for the handwriting. So you're starting with Dominus, which for the medieval people was the Lord or the One. All right. Regina Caeli, Queen of Heaven, that's the moon. Microcosmos, which is the Earth. Fatas, the Fatas are the fates. So those are the movable planets. The planets minus Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Okay, so the visible planets, because it wasn't up until Copernicus and Galileo that anyone knew there were any more planets. So those are the planets that people had felt were influencing them. Sol is the sun, the Lactea is the Milky Way, and then the Sidere is the immovable stars, and then back to Dominus. So you're moving out of the one through all these levels of being and back into the one. Okay? So those are two models of how the one gets sacrificed into the many. And so there are harmonic ways. So this is a harmonic and a cosmological way to divide the one into the many. All right? And there are obviously many inharmonic ways to do that. But the Vedic seers, the Vedic poets, right, this is what they based on. The Vedic culture was an oral, O-R-A-U, A-U-R-A-L, oral, and an oral culture, O-R-A-L culture. Okay, so their chants, the Vedic chants or the Vedic poems, there are 10,800 of them, were based on this musical model. And they didn't use this particular one, but they had their own. And the Vedic poems were mathematical, they were poetic, they were mythological, and it was back at a time when these things were not differentiated. You know, we can barely grasp the depth of what these people were doing. And they were called rishis. And R, this is a vowel R. You put a dot under something in Sanskrit, it's a retroflex. You turn your tongue back and an automatic Indian accent. So these are the rishis. Rishis. So rishis were the seer poets of the Vedic times, and they wrote these poems. Okay, and these poems, they're inspired by, usually inspired by Vach, which is speech, the goddess. So Vach is the first goddess of the Vedic pantheon, and she's the goddess of speech because she makes all the other gods possible. You can't chant to any god, you can't enchant any god into existence without Vach. She's the most important one, and there are poems to Vach. So the rishis then would be inspired and ride this wave that we talked about back in and out of the one as best as they could. And coming out of the one, they would compose these poems. And these poems / songs / mythological stories. And then they would chant them. And they would chant them for the community. And so the whole community would be held together in this chant. And this whole community, so this whole cosmology would be created and held together by these Vedic seers. The Celtic bards did very much the same thing. I think John Michel and a number of other people done research into that. And then, so then you would chant the poems, and of course then the same poems would help you go back in to the one and back into that ecstatic experience. And then you would come back out, and the poems would work for a while, and then you would have to come up with new poems. And so it's this whole process that Antonio de Nicolis, who's a very interesting Vedic scholar, calls innovation and continuity. All right. So the reason that the Vedic culture, in a sense, has stayed continuous, is the longest continuous, I think, existing. Some people put the Vedas back 6,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. No one really knows for sure. But the fact is that the whole Vedic inspiration has kept on going back into the source and coming back different, coming back and changing for the times. So that's part of it. So that's kind of my wrap on that. And essentially, if you expand that notion, really the function of all art is to return you to the source. those of you who know Rumi, right? He opens his big Mathnawi, which is this enormous poem, one of the longest poems ever written, with the image of the reed being cut. And you cut the reed from the stream bed and you make a flute out of it. And the first thing the flute sings about is it's mourning it's being cut from the reed bed, right? It's mourning its separation. And really all art, all sacred art, I'll call it sacred art, but really all art, because really anything that's not sacred art is, according to James Joyce, pornography, right? It's always something that's based in a lower place, all right? It's a titillation of some kind or another. So all art that's not bringing you back into the sacred for James Joyce is considered pornography. So, with me so far?
Yeah.
Okay. So there are essentially two kinds of rituals. And one was a householder ritual, and one was called the public ritual. And I won't give you the Sanskrit names for that. They're in your handout. But to give you an idea of the public ritual, I'm sorry, Martin, I'm gonna.
No, that's good.
I like to wander. I pulled this out. It actually was on here anyway. This is the altar for the Agnihotra, which is a big ritual, and they used 10,800 bricks for it. And like I said, there are 10,800 poems of the Rig Veda. Those of us who studied them, the number 108 is more than a little significant. There are, and just to give you my favorite one, there are exactly 108 diameters of the sun between the sun and the earth, and there are exactly 108 diameters of the moon between the moon and the earth. All right, which is why the moon and the sun fit exactly over each other. I mean, if you think about it, we have to be in a pretty particular spot for that to work out exactly, wouldn't we? So some people might think that this world was made for this. So anyway, so those rituals were very elaborate, and there would be rishis, they would be chanting for like months on end, and the cool thing is that the dimensions of these bricks were all laid out on the physical dimensions on the person for whom the sacrifice was being made. Usually, and back then it was usually someone who could afford to have a boatload of rishis over for a month. And feed them and have them do it, but it was also a community thing. So he would, they would measure his dimensions, usually a cubit of some kind, which is usually the elbow to the end of the finger, and they would make these on his dimensions. So they were making a sacralized version of him to be worked in the sacrifice. And then they build a whole hut around him, using those dimensions. And at the end of it, they burn all of it, because there are no ancient Vedic temples. Even if you go down to Mohenjo-daro and those Harappa, the whatchamacallit cities, the Indus Valley civilization, which is very old, they don't find temples there. So my thinking is that, well, that's because they just built the temples out of the wood, burned them, returned them back into the one. Which is something, by the way, that bees do when they this is something that Alan Chadwick says, so I'm going to be bouncing between Alan every once in a while, and Steiner says that the bees are, that they have a destiny to return their home to nature. You can notice birds do that with their nests. Wasps, they make these, incredibly elaborate, not with the hornets, with the paper, and then they're just gone, right? So they have this duty to return their homes to nature. And it also reminds me of Martine Prechtel and the which tribe? In Guatemala. In Guatemala, where their houses would be just like these total ramshackle affairs that would be in this continuous state of returning back to nature, So that's all in there, and you can think of the Tibetan sand mandalas where they just wipe them up, and so there's this movement. The but what Agnihotra is, which is what we're here to talk about, is a householder ritual. So these are less elaborate. They took place usually sunrise at sunset, sometimes at other times. And in fact, if you did the big ritual, you were kind of given the right and the duty to hold the fire for the other rituals, for the in-home rituals. So, this particular ritual, Agnihotra, it came through, there's this guy named Vasant Paranjpe, who kind of came to the United States in the 70s. And this is, you can kind of read this story in Secrets of the Soil. And he's the one who's been mostly getting people to perform Agnihotra. Okay? And this is kind of like, from here we're going to get into a little bit into the weird India guru land. So he claims he was sent by this other person who has the name Parama Sadguru Shri Garandran Maharaj. And you know, what a surprise when he typed in www.paramasadguru Shri Gajanan Maharaj, it was available. So, you know, you figured it would be taken, but no. So, but the weird thing about this dude is that he calls himself the Kalki Avatar. So I'm giving you this because when you go to the website, you're going to see a lot of things like, you know, Agnihotra, salvation of everything, it's the only salvation of mankind, you know, these kind of things, all praise to the guru. You're going to find a fair amount of that stuff, all right? In yoga, my background is in studying classical yoga, which was, you know, my BS meter is it pointing to the teacher or is it pointing to the teachings, all right? That's my first question. And there's a concept, which is my favorite. It's KHY, right? Viveka Kyatir. That means discriminative discernment. Okay, Viveka is discrimination, Kyatir is discernment. And so you really got to kind of penetrate through all this stuff. So you do a little more penetrating, and it turns out there's this other guy named Sri M.G. Sotar Sahib, who says that he actually taught Paranjay in the 60s at the behest of the guy with the really long name. and then he sent him over. So you've got this game going on, and I just tell you, so you see it, you know it. The thing that gets me, that no one talks about on the website, is that he calls himself the Kalki Avatar. And only a handful of, you know, Sanskritophiles like myself would know who the Kalki Avatar is. And the Kalki Avatar, essentially, the word avatar means essentially descending down into, someone who comes from above, right? But there are 10 incarnations of Vishnu. And we won't get into the earlier ones, but I'll tell you number 7 is Rama, right? Who's big. He's got a whole epic named after him, the Ramayana. 8 is Krishna. And Krishna's fun because he gets 3 dots. Krishna. And he's the star of the Bhagavad Gita and of the other Indian epic called the Mahabharata, the great Bharata War. And that was the war that ended the last age. Number 9 is Gautama Buddha. which is interesting because Gautama Buddha is not a Hindu, not a practicing Hindu. In fact, he went against the Hinduism and founded, obviously Buddhism. But it's interesting, the Advaitic, or the sort of the hardcore Hindus, say that the Gautama Buddha, the Vishnu incarnated as Gautama Buddha so that we could see what an incorrect teaching looks like. You know, I guess. But, so the 10th one is the one of the future. And that's Kalki. And Kalki is supposed to usher in the next age. The end of this particular age. And of course, we've gone through the gold, silver, bronze, and now we're in the iron age, or the Asat age, or the whatever, you know, the nasty one, the nasty, brutish, and not terribly short age. And that's supposed to institute another, you know, the next age. So Kalki is supposed to come in. So in other words, to claim that you're the Kalki avatar is to put yourself in fairly rarefied company.
So watch out when you go to
So that I figured that you guys needed to at least be forewarned if you're going to the websites. Now that said, that doesn't mean anything about the ritual itself, okay? Which may be very old, and you know, whatever the funnel is to bring this, you know, hopefully it works. Is there a clock somewhere, or is that?
It's right in front of you.
Oh, that one. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the different aspects of the ritual itself. Okay. Now it takes place at a specific time. It takes place at the sunrise, at the sunset, and if you go on the website, you can type in your place, and they'll send you, you know, the exact minute of the sunrise and the sunset. You know, I would say from my experience, there's something that happens at that moment. All right. Now, the first day, Robert was talking about the solar winds hitting the geomagnetic field at a certain angle. Okay, at that point. I was going to read a little something because that's one level of it, or one way of looking at it. And I think we need lots of ways of looking at things. So Alan Chadwick would be much more mythological and mystical look at it. So this is him in this book describing, which took us, we were watching, what's that, this thing on John Adams, and it was about the Revolutionary War, and we figured out that the book took just a little longer than the Revolutionary War to get out. So don't come to us for advice on publishing. So anyway, this is Alan on that. So he talks about it as the arrival of Aurora. Aurora is the goddess of the dawn, right? The arrival of Aurora, this great ritual that happens every day. Let us see what happens. Let us look at the great secret that it is. The sun is the planetary leader. And you realize that all of the other prima mobile, the secundus mobile, and even the ethereal world of them. So one is, the prima mobile is the planets, and the secundus mobile is the zodiac. Okay, so, but particularly revolves entirely around Sol. The moment that the sun arises, a stream takes place, of which the only word that I would use to give you is energy. That energy flows for the first time at a complete angle, side acute angle. It is not vertical, it's the very opposite. It is the first moment of dawn at a complete angle. It's the gentlest of all angles. The coming of that energy is the leader, the sun energy coming in. The energy flows and demands that the energy of the earth come out and meet it and marry it. And this is obliged to be compliant and cannot be refuted. Alan does talk a lot in absolutes, and he's right. And you will find that the energy of the earth rises up through the strata, first of all from near the surface, and joins the energy of the sun and marries it. And in marrying it, makes this exquisite gift of atmosphere in which we all delight, live, and breathe. Now realize that the sun is luciferic and the earth is Ahrimanic. And here you have the beginning of the fabulation that from here to there, here up is luciferic, and from there down is of course Ahrimanic. Now when the dawn comes, what you call the luciferic flows and the demand of the great suns, wake up, come out, meet and marry. And so you realize how it is that frost always sets just after dawn. It is drawing up from the deep, deep earth the atmospheres and the forces out of the cold, wet earth, drawing them up in this marriage of energy. Okay, I'm going to stop there. So this is Alan kind of looking at the same thing. In my yoga practice for years, you would always meditate at sunrise. And at that moment of sunrise, there's an incredible experience. And the experience is kind of coming in and riding this particular marriage, which is an alchemical marriage. You look at it a whole bunch of different ways, but it happens every day, okay? So that's why Agnihotra is done. At sunrise, sunset is kind of the opposite thing happens. But it's also, and so also at that time, sort of like the veils between the physical and the non-physical are much more diaphanous. And I would say from experience, it's kind of like a 3-minute play, during which, and so you kind of get your fire going beforehand, and then at that moment, you begin the ritual. So the first aspect of that is this sacred time. The second aspect of Agnihotra is using cow dung. And cow dung has been used throughout India for centuries. It has very powerful disinfectant qualities. And if you test it, I have some back here, it comes up very strong in positive green, which I don't know for a fact, but I assume positive green gives you fertility, great fertility. And it tests very well for BG3. Okay. And of course, all of biodynamic preps are built around the workings of the cow, either burying things in the cow horns, cow manure, using various parts of the cow's stomach for various preps. All right?
Steve,
Yeah.
Is that so even for cows from factory farms?
I would say less so. Maybe not so. I would not employ, you got to figure the kind of life that cow has had. In other words, for a cow to obtain its so-called spiritual status, it has to live a cow life. And if a cow's not grazing, if it's not transforming grass into milk, what is it doing? It's an abomination, right?
Have you ever taken a look at that? From factory farms?
No, I haven't tested it. Don't got time. So the next aspect is this lovely little copper pyramid that's used within which you build the fire. Okay, a couple of interesting things I found at copper. Most of you probably know that each of the visible planets has a metal associated with it. The sun is gold, moon is silver. I think Jupiter is tin. I forget all of them, but Venus is copper. So here we have the love marriage again of Venus going here. Now Venus also, of bodily parts, Venus is controlling, not surprisingly, the veins, right? And so that controls circulation, and so circulation and cleansing. So again, this ritual is an atmospheric cleansing. Salute. It's an atmospheric cleansing that we're doing with this particular ritual. So again, it ties in nicely. It's also Venus ties in with the Hermetic principle of vibration, and then like sight and fire. The other curious thing, also, if you get to do this, put it on some sort of a tile, because this bottom copper piece gets very hot. They don't tell you that, which you should probably know that anyway, but just in case. But I did a little measuring. It's supposed to be this particular size. So this is 14.5 centimeters across 5.25 centimeters across the bottom, and 6.5 centimeters in height. And if you do the ratio of the height to the width across the top, you get a perfect square root of 5. I mean, 99, what I figured out, 99.95, something like that percent. So you get a perfect square root of 5, and again, getting back to the sacred geometry, the square root of 5 is intimately tied to the golden mean. Phi is equal to 1 plus the square root of 5 over 2. It's 1 plus or minus, but that's inconsequential. So in other words, you get the square root of 5 on your calculator, add 1 to it, divide it in half, you get phi. So the phi ratio and the square root of 5 are essentially sides of the same coin. So the other curious thing about this is that when you build the fire, you take the cow dung and you build it in a pyramid shape inside it. Okay? So essentially it's straddled, but essentially this is if going back to Platonic solids, this is the bottom half of what? An octahedron, right? So, in other words, if you're building another pyramid up from here, and also the word fire comes from PYR, from the word for pyramid. In other words, you have the pyramid. I don't know, I feel like I'm wasting papers, but then we can make mulch gardens with it, so it's all right. All right. So you have the pyramids. My circles are better than my periods, apparently. And then you're putting the dung in a pyramid inside. You're essentially creating an octahedron, which is basically two pyramids, right, joined together at their base. All right, so that's an octahedron. An octahedron is representative of the element air. So now again, so you can see how this whole thing, right? You can begin to see how all these things are kind of coalescing into this ceremony. So you've got the Platonic solid that works with the element of air. You've got the copper of Venus doing the circulation. All right. So you got this whole movement. So you can see how this is all moving to generate this cleansing of the air, of the atmosphere. And then also, so it's not only, but because, all right. So you've got the fire. And then you've got the copper and the earth. So in other words, you're doing this marriage of the physical and the non-physical in this ceremony. All right. And so that's why. So you're not only cleansing the physical air, but you're cleansing the etheric air or the prana. Okay. So you're working on not only on the O2 and nitrogen level, but you're working on the pranic on that level, on the etheric level. With me so far? Yeah. Okay. What do you burn in here then? All right. So now you got the fire going. So you burn whole grain rice, not broken rice, in ghee, clarified butter. Okay. And so you got rice, which is emblematic of the plant world, and then you have ghee, which is back emblematic of the animal world. So you got the etheric world of the plants, and then the astral world represented through the animals of the ghee. So what's ghee? Ghee is the end product. There's another alchemical process. You're starting with grass. The cow chews it, makes that amazing transformation through its stomach into milk. Then what do? Then you do another alchemical process. You churn the milk into butter, and then you take that butter, and then you burn it and clarify it and take off all the impurities, and then you have ghee. Okay, so you've gone from solid to liquid out through gas, pretty much. So you've had this whole other process going. So that's what ghee is, and that's why ghee is so pure, and when you cook with it, it's just amazing what it does for food. Okay, so that's the offering that goes in, and that goes in as you say the mantras. Okay, and the mantras they're designed to embody the energy that we talked about of this sunrise, of this marriage. So you have them in your handout. It's Surya Svaha, Surya Idam Na Mama. All right, and then Prajapati Svaha, Prajapati Idam Na Mama. And then in the afternoon you replace Surya with Agni. And Surya again is the solar deity. Again, it's the vibrational quality of Sanskrit that we're talking about. The language was designed to be a vibrational match to that which you're talking about. So if you're chanting the Devi mantra, you are incarnating the Devi. You're not calling to somebody out there. You're going into a vibrational resonance with the Devi by using that chant. And that's what Sanskrit was designed for. It wasn't a language spoken on street corners in Harappa 5,000 years ago. In fact, only the upper two castes were even allowed to speak Sanskrit. The priestly caste and the prince warrior caste. Most of the bums like me wouldn't actually be learning Sanskrit back then. If you come from Queens, you don't learn Sanskrit. All right, so then you take that ash. So then there's something called Homa therapy. And then you have a number of uses for this ash. And in fact, I'll even pass it around so you guys can kind of. This is actual ash from our ritual, and this you make a salve with it by mixing with ghee, 9 parts ghee to 1 part of the Agnihotra ash. So if you feel inclined, you can wipe it on something that it does kind of stain if you're looking to worry about those kind of things, but. Pass it around if you want to douse it. I'll leave them up here. You can check out what you get from them. Now the ash gets used for agricultural purposes. So they've done a bunch of studies on them. And if you want, you can go to the websites and get this stuff. There's also a couple of books up here. I might as well give this to you now while I'm thinking about it. There's the website to buy this stuff. I didn't give it to you. I gave you a bunch of websites. One of it is through there. One, it's I had it here. It's like Agnihotra Supplies, and they're in Madison, Virginia. So the Virginiaites, tell me where Madison, Virginia is?
Yeah, it's outside of Charlottesville, about 20 minutes.
Outside Charlottesville, okay. It's in the aura of Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, so they're the ones that sell the kit, which is I believe $65, which gives you the copper things, the book, the CD, which has this unbelievable amount of reverb. It sounds like Agni himself speaking. So it's hysterical. And then this little booklet that kind of gives you the whole deal. They give you a little rice, ghee. They give you enough.
Buy supplies of dung from them if you want.
Yes, and they give you a little bit of dung. Yeah, and so the problem for us, if it's just 2 people, so you have to get up and do it all the time, right? And I'll let you guys guess which one of us did the sunrise and which one of us did the sunset. But after a while, we were kind of like running low on. We live in a temperate rainforest, and the dung would just get imbued with moisture no matter what we tried, and it was a real pain in the neck to light. So you have to use all this ghee to do it. So and ghee is fairly expensive even at butter prices, even if you're not buying it straight up and making your own. So anyway, so that's where you get it. I think it's $65 for the set. So it's pretty interesting. What's that? Agnihotra Supplies. That's going to either be .com or .org, but it's through the same people who do the Agnihotra medicine, and you'll get it if you do just if you do a search, it'll come up within the first couple.
They didn't have a traveling size.
Tika.
So, I was just listening to you talk about the price of heat and, how maybe it may sometimes keeping momentum going, but maybe, what do you think about employing the concept of biogeometry and finding like the strongest pivot point for the carrier wave, so that by doing one ceremony at a strategic time, could it potentially have a farther reaching effect?
Well, actually, they have these certain huts that you can make. That for broadcasting for over acres. This probably has a couple of acre range. Okay.
But like through time space continuum too. I mean, that's geographic.
Well, it can't hurt to try, Yeah. But, so they always say, this is what you do, this is Agnihotra. If you're doing anything else, it's not Agnihotra, right? If you can come ways to augment it and augment the broadcast, I think that's great, if that's what you're looking to do, But, nothing beats the actual ritual, the mantras, at that point in time in this particular configuration, okay? And the last thing I'll get to, and I'll just run through this quickly, then we'll take a break and we'll come back and do biodynamics. I'm just going to tell you about some of the studies that have been done in agriculture, and they're on the sites, and I have a couple of books where they list them. So I'm just going to show, and they've done. This is what I don't quite understand. They say they've done double-blind studies, but how do you grow something here and then grow something a couple acres away, and do the chant here and have the same conditions over there? So I don't know how exactly you get a double-blind study, as far as things like this goes. But they've done them, and may have to read a little more, but they've done a lot of this in the testing anyway. Peru, Venezuela. I don't know if that's pre or post Hugo, and India. They found that it increased germination rates in grapes, increases yield, releases phosphates into the soil, which is interesting, because especially in terms of Andrew talking earlier today about the soils lacking in phosphates. They say it protects fruit from frost, which I guess that's Agni's job. Grain is preserved longer. I think most of this is in your handout. Keeps pests away, stabilizes potassium and nitrogen in the soil.
I should ask a question. Did you guys notice when you were doing it, though, that you didn't get colds? Because that was one of the other things kind of like who was doing it. Because they never got colds.
And I don't often get cold. We did it for a few seasons. In general, I don't often get cold, though something did come in this year that doesn't seem to be going, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't get them a lot anyway, because then what is it? Is it the biodynamic produce that we grow and eat? It could be a bunch of things helping that out too. So the other cool thing, and this is that in Croatia or Serbia after Chernobyl, in places where the soil had been testing for radiation, they found after Agnihotra ritual that the Geiger counter wasn't picking up anything. So it's that claim. There's also a claim with Biodynamics that, and I can't remember where it was, but they were also not picking up the radiation on the farms that were doing Biodynamics. So again, somehow we would think that this atmosphere is being cleansed. And there's other tests that they did with people that supposedly didn't know anything about Agnihotra, that they did some Kirlian photography, and that after the ritual was in their finger or whatever they were doing. As far as I know, there are no tests on Wi-Fi waves and things like that on how they work with them. But that's certainly what you would want to be counteracting. And again, you know, this is the atmosphere that you're trying to cleanse. And again, it has a lot of medicinal uses. A lot of it is, you know, if you read the book, it'll say things, well, for depression, mix some Agnihotra ash with St. John's wort. You know, so which is the one that's helping the depression? I don't know. So I think it probably would potentize a lot of medicinal things, but it's also supposed to be very good for alcohol addictions and for drug addictions. And again, I think doing them would probably be very good for someone who's in that state, someone to reconnect them with the earth, with the movement of the stars, and you know, from where they are in the cosmos, and you know, anchor them back in so that they can clear those things out of themselves.
Do you know if it's used like clay for internal cleansing or?
Yes, and for water purification. And for water purification too.
And to clean the teeth like charcoal?
It might, I don't know, I didn't remember reading that. So we're going to take like a 5 minute, get any more questions, we'll take a 5-minute break or so.
Usually 10.
Right, we got 2 breaks this afternoon, so that's why.
With you?
Yeah, well, there's one after I'm done, so.
Okay.
So 7.5 minute break. Right, so. Are we all set?
Yep.
All right, welcome. So I'm going to go try to talk about biodynamics very quickly so that we have time for Nancy to regale us with tales of the mystic and amazing Pulsation Center in Madison County, the even more mystic and amazing Madison County. Yes, Chris, we live in Madison County. We've been trying very hard to bring Madison County into the 19th century. For all questions biodynamic, Mr. Craig Siska in the corner there. He knows an incredible amount. He studied with Alan Chadwick. He's read the Steiner books backwards, forwards, inside out, from 7 dimensions, and he's terrific. If you have any questions about biodynamics, and certainly about Alan Chadwick, he'll even, if you tickle him, he'll do an impression of Alan Chadwick for you. He does an amazing one. But he's an incredible resource and an incredible friend. So I'm glad he's here. Even actually, before I hit biodynamics, because I know I'm going to want to talk about it briefly, I'm going to talk about colony collapse disorder, also known as CCD. All right, this is going to be really quick. Bees are leaving their hives, and no one knows why. That's the essence of colony collapse disorder, okay? The government is funding studies. They're all tripping over themselves. Some people say it's cell towers. Mites, viruses, all these things. The best thing you want to read is this little 2-page blurb by Gunther Hauck that's in your handouts. Read it and you'll learn as much about colony collapse disorder as I know. It's terrific. You know, essentially, the bees have been getting a bad ride for a long time. Back in the 1800s, we started expanding their cell size so that we could get more honey because it's a bigger cell. All right, so that started bringing in all these other problems, and it's been one stress after another. All right, probably most of you know now, but I didn't know until this started coming up last year. You know, bees just don't live on happy little farms, but they get trucked to the farms. Why? Because they spray all over the farms, and bees couldn't live there in the first place. All right, they'd be dead. So instead, after we're done spraying, the truck pulls in, dumps a few hives out, and runs on to the next place. You know, and they fertilize the almond trees or whatever it is. You know, and they get packed back into the truck. This is not a bee life. Bees live. You go plop. Here they are. We go find flowers. We come back. You know, that's their deal. We'll make honey for you. You know, this is what they do. So we've just totally stressed them out. Again, Alan talks about this. We're always, you know, everything, every piece of fruit that we have, every vegetable that we have is a working between humans and nature, between what Alan called the image, the human imagination. The human imagination is to have instead of having that crab apples, to having a bigger, juicier apple. And that imagination, and then the working with nature, eventually you get these apples, and you get hundreds of kinds of apples. You know, it's the human imagination working with nature, and nature loves to work with humans on that level. But we obviously have gone into the distortion mode. You know, we take the bees so much, and you know, Gunther Haupt talks about we're artificially inseminating queens, and we're raising millions of queens to kill them just to harvest royal jelly. You know, I mean, this is what we do. We all know what happens to cows. We all know what happens, you know, to the food we eat. Okay. As we're pulling off the exit to come here off of 26, right? So there was right at the corner there's the Exxon, McDonald's, and Krispy Kreme. So you talk about your axis of evil, you know. I said, there it is, you know. You know, this passes for motion and nutrition. You know, we've been bombing the wrong place. So, anyway, so what Gunther Haupt essentially says in this article is that, you know, these things that are going after the bees, like the woolly adelgids going after the trees, nature takes care of its weakness, and then it reclaims it and brings it back into its origin, you know, and so anything that is weak is going to be attacked by something else. This is what happens in gardens. This is what happens in monoculture. When, and Alan, I'm pretty sure it's in the book, in other words, if you had to get all your nutrition from Wonder Bread, how much Wonder Bread would you have to eat? Right? If you needed one, what's that? None, right. You're better off not eating it, exactly, right? So think about these insects coming upon this you know, field of broccoli that has no nutritional quality whatsoever at some, you know, agribusiness. Well, the insects will have to take out the whole field in order to get what they need, all right? So in our farm, a few years ago, I thought this was amazing. You know, we had like about 5 or 6 potato plants, and we come in one day and there's Colorado potato beetles all over this one plant. So we say, wow, that's interesting. So come back within a couple of days, the plant is completely gone. So are the beetles. And that was it. That was it. They had their one plant, and that's all they needed, you know? But this is what biodynamics is about. This is what biodynamics is creating, and Andrew was talking about earlier. You're creating diversity. You're bringing in the insects. You're not fighting them and knocking them off and trying to get rid of them. You know, you're bringing in all this diversity and creating a balance. You know, so yes, so the bugs get a few. You know, let them take a couple of plants. You know, and it takes a few years to get this, you know, really humming. And you know, we're, you know, after 7 years, I guess, we're getting kind of close to it, you know. But always something, you know, comes in. So, but I did do a little research, and I did a couple of really cool things about the bees that I want to relate to you. Is that the rotation of the sun is 21 days. Okay. So the queen, or the princesses, are hatched in 16 days, 16 being a significant number. All right, that's a golden number, and again, that's with the sun. So the queen is purely of the sun. Okay. The workers are 21 days, so they're exactly one revolution of the sun. So they actually mediate perfectly between the Earth and the sun. And then the drones are 23, 24 days, so they've gone past the cycle of the sun and into the Earth, so they're of the Earth. So that's one way that the hives are balanced. Alan talks about in the bee lecture about, and also Steiner, that the whole hive is dominated by Venus, and you know, the fact that they don't have a sex drive or a sex act. The whole hive is a continuous act of love, and then it's movement with the flowers back and forth, and that's what the hive is all about. It's under the domination of Venus. Okay, and the other thing I thought that was interesting was 2 other interesting things. One, Steiner says it was the bees were the first domesticated animal, and they were domesticated in Atlantis. My memory doesn't go back that far, but it came from a form of wasp originally, according to Steiner. and that eating honey, and everybody knows that the combs are hexagonal, right? There's a certain, by eating honey, you're bringing into your body this, what he's called this coherence. There's a word we've been using a lot, this hexagonal coherence, which is very important in strengthening bones and in bringing a certain coherence to the blood. So that's another thing that comes out of Steiner that I thought you'd find interesting.
Can you give clarification if you know?
What the actual, I think there was like 1/3 of a millimeter, centimeters, I forget what the exact size was, but it actually, you know, though it's not much bigger, it actually like almost doubles the size of the cell when you make it a little smaller on just one side, right? So what we've done, Shiwa and Andrew and Chris and I and a number of other people have found this guy, and there are a bunch of other people doing it, and they're called small cells. And they've gone back to breeding them into the small cells. So a couple of things happen with that, and we do it organically also. There are tracheal mites that bother the bees. And now when they're smaller, the mites don't fit down their throat. So that's one thing you don't have to worry about. The other thing is another called a varroa mite, and that's the other big problem in beehives. And they go into the cell, and sort of like, I guess they kind of lay around the larvae, and then they get born with it, and they can just kind of get all over the hive. What happens is with the smaller cells, they get capped so much more quickly that the varroa mites don't get in there as frequently. And so you're going to have things in a beehive, but if you have a healthy beehive, it's going to take care of itself. And if you have a weak beehive that you're always spraying and doing all this kind of stuff and antibiotics, you know, it'll take care of itself, Chris.
Also, by enlarging the size of the individual cell, the bee's bodies have to grow larger to fit into that cell, so it weakens its structure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So far, you know, we've just got bees this year. So.
Are you making those? What did you call it? The original matrix, the structure that they built.
The foundation.
Foundation.
Yeah.
You're building that locally.
Well, there's someone in. Yeah. Yeah. The standard places have it. Of course, this guy makes it from wax. Other places you can get it, but it's made out of plastic, which you would guess is kind of inferior. All right. So. Half hour to kind of blow through biodynamics. But the thing is, I have to do this, I'm sorry. But the question is, how do we get here? All right, because to understand why you even need biodynamics, why you even need organics. I mean, it's they make it sound like organics is some sort of like aberrant thing, like it wasn't, the way it always was. Is that commercial type of thing is the norm. They make you feel like you're doing this weird fringe thing, right? So earlier on, Robert said something. He was like an unrepentant vitalist or something like that. And I'm also stuck in that particular camp. But I'm going to give this to you really quickly. In the West, most thought is going to go back to Plato and Aristotle. Okay? Now, I'm going to say the school of Plato and the school of Aristotle, and not the Steinerian Aristotle stream or the Platonic stream so much as the actual schools as they were on Earth and their thoughts were delineated. Okay? Because we have Plato's dialogues, but we don't have any of his class notes. So we don't know what he said in class. Aristotle, we have all his class notes and none of his dialogues. We don't know what he wrote. So it's a real interesting thing that goes on here. But in essence, Plato is talking about ideas, and they're both talking about how do the spiritual and the material come together. All right. So for Plato, he calls them ideas, and he would say that the idea of this chair precedes the physical chair. Okay, but he never exactly says how they interact. He's very elusive on that. Okay, Aristotle says, well, the idea of the chair or the form of the chair is in the chair and is actually in every individual chair. Okay? You guys get that distinction? Okay? It is a pretty basic distinction. But what happens is after Aristotle dies, this guy named Theophrastus takes Aristotle's school more into a materialistic and a classification direction. Okay, so it's not only chair. Well, what kind of chair is it? Does it have 4 legs? Does it have 3 legs? You know, classifying animals, classifying all this stuff. And so when you're focused on the end product that way, you're going to automatically tend towards materialism. All right. After Plato passes in his school, the Stoics take over, and the Stoics, you know, are very much of this kind of, this life is really worth nothing. You know, it's really the next world, and you know, there's nothing of this world that's really terrific. That's a real bad overview of the Stoics, but it's the kind of direction that Plato gets taken. So this is the way Plato and Aristotle have been looked back at. You know, and then there's the Aristotelian logic, so-called Aristotelian logic, which means something is either, it can't be A and B. All right, it's either, you know, it's either this, but it can't be that. All right, but whereas in sort of a mystical interpretation, you say, well, you know, everything has sort of a unity. So in a certain sense, you know, I'm the same as Marnie, you know. But for Aristotle, there's no way that I'm ever the same as Marnie. We're 2 discrete, separate things. For the Aristotelian school, I won't say for Aristotle. All right, for a more Eastern esoteric kind of thought, well, in a certain sense, we're completely different. In a certain sense, we have the same origin. So in a certain sense, we're the same, you know. And there's a whole other way of doing things. So eventually this school of physicalism gets delineated through, especially through the Englishman Francis Bacon, you know, who lots of people like to tell me wrote Shakespeare, and I just say, but his taking of knowledge becomes not knowledge, you know, of understanding, but knowledge of power and knowledge of control. So that's a big shift that happens through Bacon, okay? And then it ends up moving through, let's say, Galileo and Newton when the whole shift into heliocentrism occurs. Basically, you end up with Galileo, who will say the same thing as Pythagoras. Galileo will say the universe is number. But for Galileo, it's number as quantity, right? Whereas for Pythagoras and for Plato, it's number as quality, all right? And that's a world of difference, though they, you know, you'd read the quote and you'd think they're saying the same thing. So through the other side, you end up with people like Paracelsus. Now, Paracelsus is somebody that Alan Chadwick would consider to be a real direct ancestor. He was an alchemist, a plant alchemist, and he did a lot of healing through plants. All right, and then you go through people like Goethe, Herr Steiner, and then I run it into Chadwick. So when you get to around Goethe's time, and maybe a little bit after, so you're having all these arguments back in the 1800s. You know, are things just physical, or is there? The vitalists say, well, there's, you know, a life force. There's something else, right? And so, the reason, and their argument for a lot of them was that, well, you can't synthesize, you know, a life product. You can't synthesize blood. You can't synthesize urine. You know, so there's a life force in there that you can't do. Well, then, 1828, there was a big hoopla amongst the physicalists because they synthesized urea in Germany. All right, so then after that, everybody went flying over to that camp. The vitalists were completely debunked, and that was it. And so, you know, ironically, urea leads to NPK, to all the plastics, and into the chemical corporate agribusiness. Okay, so these guys think they won. All right. So on the other side, you've got Steiner, who is in a sense trying to bring together these ways of looking at the material and the spiritual together. And at some point, Pfeiffer, right, who asks him, you know, why is it that these teachings aren't taking hold? And Steiner says it's the food. the food, the spiritual forces can't take hold in you. Why? Because there is no spiritual force in the food. So, literally, you are what you eat. So if you're eating something that the spiritual forces are in, isn't that something we're used to thinking about? We're used to thinking, yeah, well, it's got nutrition, it's got some vitamins for me. But spiritual forces? But this is the way food was grown in the ancient world. It was grown in concert with the cosmos, in concert with the way, where the moon was and where the planets were. 'Cause at every moment was completely different, and you had to be in tune with that. And then you're bringing the cosmic into the plants itself, and then you're eating that, and then, in a sense, your body is becoming that, and you resonate with that, and you take hold with these sort of spiritual teachings. So that, to me, is the essence of why biodynamics is needed and what's important about it. Okay? So this whole reintegration of the spiritual into the agricultural. That's not the only one. So again, we talked about Agnihotra, which is a way of bringing the ritual into it. You've got the Paralandra with the co-creative gardening. Phil Callahan was talking about Irish round towers and the book that Robert mentioned with the stone circles. All right, indigenous peoples are obviously doing these, and there's work with biogeometry on that. And those are all various tools to bring the spiritual back into the agricultural. Okay? So that's kind of like, does everybody follow that? I know that was a real lightning, but no one talks about this, so.
Just one quick question. What about next to Goethe, or what is that?
Next to Goethe, Urflanz. Urflanz is the beginning, Urflanz, it's the beginning plant, the original plant. Here's one thing, he went for a search for the original plant. That's for the extended lecture.
But the plant between sun and earth is a great...
Yeah, Oliver Wichter and George Adams. Okay. So anyway, yes, I haven't done this particular lecture for, now I have to see what it is. All right. So when you're talking about the cosmic, a lot of what you're talking about is where the moon is in a particular sign. Okay. And I think I have that all delineated in here somewhere, and you can find it in any of the biodynamics books. But on a very basic level, right? Each of the 12 signs is associated with an element: earth, air, fire, and water, right? So, and then also with so the air signs are associated with flowers. They're associated with different parts of the plant. I'll slow down a second. The water signs are associated with the leaf, right? The fire signs are associated with fruit or seed. And the earth signs are associated with roots. So, on a very basic level, when the moon is in an earth sign like Taurus, okay, that's when you would harvest your potatoes. And what people like Maria Thun have done a lot of research, and I assume there are other people who have, they would harvest them on an earth sign, they'd harvest them on a water sign, they do all the different things. Well, you find if you harvest them on the water sign, they rot real quickly. If you harvest them during the earth sign, they last. We harvested pumpkins on a fruit sign, lasted us all winter. We got through. We ate our last one, I think, in like March or April or something like that. So our experience is that this is really dynamite, and this is really old school. So you would, in a general way. So if you were looking for a tomato, for a fruit, you would plant it on a fruit day, and then you would cultivate around it on a fruit day. You would work with it on that day, because on that day, the cosmic forces of those signs are coming into the plant and bring it in the direction that you want it to go, which is towards the fruit. Okay, so that's one whole basic thing, and then there's the biodynamic calendar, Stella, S-T-E-L-L-A-N-A-T-U-R-A, Stella Natura. And that'll just give you a calendar, gives you the day. It tells you whether it's a fruit day, what's day. And then there are periods like your blackouts, like last week we had the eclipse, right? And that was a blackout all day. So those are days you don't want to be doing anything, right? So you ever wonder why certain days you plant something and it don't come up, And before I knew this, I said, well, now I know why it's not coming up. They shouldn't have planted it. Okay, does everybody kind of follow that? Yeah. Please. Yes, exactly. Thank you. I even have that here. Geocentric versus it's a geocentric versus sidereal. Yes. In my long lecture, I get into that. Sidereal, everyone knows that's where the signs are actually where they are right now, as opposed to tropical, which is most astrology right now uses tropical, which is where the signs were back in Ptolemy's like 83rd birthday, I think.
So if you go outside and actually look up in the heavens, the moon will actually see, and you knew your stars.
Right.
And you see the moon in the constellations, that's sidereal. If you go to the newspaper and open it up to read your horoscope, that's tropical.
Right. Right, and so that's why there's differing periods, because tropical uses an idealized, I think, right, delineation of the cosmos, whereas this uses the actual delineation, and some signs take up more space on the ecliptic than others do, right? Did you want to say something, Craig? Let's see how much we want to get into. I'm not going to get into moons, but I would like to get into the other major thing. And see, this is a recapitulation of what we talked about with the sunrise and the sunset. Is that every from this at the moment of the solstice, there's a inbreathing of the cosmic into the earth, okay? And that continues until the summer solstice, and then there's a shift, and then everything is moving out. So there's this cosmic inbreathing and outbreathing, and it's obviously work the opposite way in the southern hemisphere, or those outside tiles on the Dymaxion. So there's this continuous inbreathing and outbreathing of the cosmic. So this whole year recapitulates what happens in a single day. All right. So there's this whole movement. So the movement of sunrise when things come in, and the movement of sunset when things move back out. So there's also a larger cosmic movement. Most people, like myself, will find that it's easier to do sort of deep work in the winter, because the cosmic is coming in, and that's why you have all those real sacred festivals around the winter solstice, and times of deep meditation and the deep storytelling and things like that. And then, in the summer you have the effulgence and the games and all that sort of outward, the sort of outward movement. So the thing that Steiner and this group of agriculturalists came up with as this real emergency, and the thing is that was 1920, so we're talking 60, 80, 85 years ago or so. It's still an emergency. Damn. So they came up with these biodynamic preps, which are designed to inculcate your farm, ground, garden with these cosmic forces. Okay. And again, this goes back with the cow. And the two main ones are called horn manure and horn silica, 500 and 501. I have no idea why they started with 500. So like, anybody remember Tovar, the 8-man?
5 radiated structure.
Maybe. Anyway. There was a cartoon when I was growing up. It was called Tovar the 8-man. Tobar the 8-man. Tobar was robot spelled backwards. It was like the first 7 were total screw-ups, but the 8th one was worked out. I guess I grew up in that in-between age. Was it? Maybe that was just my cartoon, I don't know.
I remember purple hippopotamus.
Yeah, it's okay. That's all right. So anyway, so we talked about that in-breathing and out-breathing. And so you would take into a cow horn, which looks a lot like a vortex. You would bury fresh, you put in fresh manure in it, and you would cap it, okay? And you bury that for the course of the winter. In other words, when all those cosmic forces are coming in to the earth. So you bury it actually, essentially from the, you do it from equinox to equinox, right? Right. So you do it from equinox to equinox, and it would be peaking during the solstice. So all this is coming. This movement is coming. All these cosmic is coming into it, going into this vortex, and inculcating this cow manure with these cosmic forces. So it's buried in the ground for 6 months. The other main one is silica. Okay, so this ground quartz is buried in a cow horn for the summer months. Okay, and then that's with the movement outwards. So, in essence, the horn manure is for fertilization of the ground, bring fertility to the ground, and then the silica is to bring fertility to the air. Now the Agnihotra and Biodynamics, especially Alan Chadwick, are the people that really, the only people I've heard of really talk about the atmosphere, and the atmosphere around the plants being as important as the soil. I'm not talking about, there's also an atmosphere in the soil, but the atmosphere around the soils is extremely important. And that's what the silica does. It brings light into the plant. There have been years where it's been cloudy, all summer long. You've had to spray extra of this stuff to bring more light itself into the plants.
Steve, I just remind people that in the handouts they just got, they have a handout actually by Craig that says Biodynamic Horticulture and Agriculture, and has all of these preps that Steve's going over right now listed, so you can follow along with that while he's tracking them.
That's right. Thanks. I forgot to mention that. I just caught that Craig had put that in. It's a nice little piece by Craig, because he also gives you the planets. So then the other main preps, and thankfully I don't have enough time to describe how they're made, but it says it right here. Now that I come to see it, I guess I could just take a second. Anyway, these are compost preps, and I think I have them out there. When we make a compost pile, and actually we started making toroidal compost piles, and essentially we'll get some brush, from like the year before, we take down some of the Jerusalem artichoke stems or something like that, and that would be our kind of our base layer, manure and scraps and all the stuff that we've collected, and leaves and things like that. And then you poke holes in the compost pile itself, and then you put in one is yarrow, chamomile, nettle, oak bark, dandelion, valerian, and they all have various things that they do, and then you read Craig's things, and then you kind of just close the holes, and then we just leave it. Yeah.
Do you want to pass around that little package so that you can see?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great idea. Okay, so that's those are for your compost, and within like 3 or 4 months we have a great compost. Even across the winter or anything, it doesn't burn. See, so I think Chadwick would say that you don't want to burn the compost because you're burning certain fertility and nutrients out of it. Though it does burn weed seeds, Chadwick actually likes weed seeds to come up because in a context of a cultivated plant coming up in a context of other wild plants, it just adds to a whole level of fertility to it, and those plants have to come up in concert with those wild plants, and it makes them stronger. And then when a certain time comes, you pluck out the weeds. Alan Chadwick was not a permaculturist. he usually had lots of people to help him doing work. You know, at least that makes it helpful. The yarrow adds trace elements, and it's put into a stag bladder, hung in the summer and buried in winter. Chamomile stabilizes nitrogen, and it's sewn up into a bovine intestine, again buried in the winter. Nettle stimulates soil health, and that nettle is an incredible disinfectant. It's also great for compost. It makes incredible compost. It's buried in peat moss in the winter and summer. Oak bark is placed into the skull of a domestic animal, and it winters in a swamp, some sort of swampy place, right? What's that? In running water? Okay. And then this it increases the healing forces and inculcates against plant disease. All right, dandelion enhances cosmic forces. Dandelion is sewn up into a bovine mesentery. It's the middle lining. It's buried for the winter. Valerian stimulates the compost, and it's fermented, and it's juiced. And that's just taken straight up. That's not buried, right?
The valerian is sprinkled on the top of the compost after.
Right. That's.
And it's stabilized and it's set.
It's stirred. In Craig's thing, he gives you the planets that these are associated with, so you can look at those. The thing that I didn't talk about is the stirring. All right. After you take the horn manure or the silica or anything out of the ground, and the Josephine Porter Institute is the place, and they also have them here. You stir them. So you put them into a bucket. If you take a 5-gallon bucket, fill it with preferably rainwater. Spring water will do. Don't use Evian. Don't use some sort of Coca-Cola tap water magically transformed into whatever. Some sort of incoherent liquid. Get rainwater is best, and then you stir it. You take either a stick or your hand, and you stir it for a minute, one direction, and then you break into chaos, and then you stir it a minute in the other direction, and you do this for an hour. So.
I will mention the ones that we ordered the ones we got here from the Josephine Porter Institute. We got
Pre-potentized.
For those of us who don't have a full hour.
Pre-stirred, yeah, so they're 20 minutes.
20 minutes, but generally we do the full.
Right, so 20 minutes, one side of Pink Floyd will get you through the 20 minutes.
Which album was that?
For the other one, you got to go the whole Wizard of Oz, I think. So, and you should be meditating. You should be thinking about what what direction, obviously, good direction that you want your garden to go. Andrew.
I just want to report, 2 weeks ago, I took part in a 4-part series of preps. And the she went into, she got 20 minutes, I got 2 hours. So as I was stirring, maybe 13 or 15 times, and bringing up the vortex, and then stirring and bringing up the vortex in the opposite direction. It's a great meditative practice. But there were some moments when everything came together, and I was not sure whether I was creating the vortex or the vortex was creating me.
Very cool. Well, and Craig mentioned this once to me, and I've still been thinking about it. He said that he was thinking that at that chaos is when the cosmic comes in and enters into the prep mixture, and then it gets, I guess, reintegrated with the stirs. Yeah, Mara.
Yeah, also, when you were mentioning earlier about the Vedic chanting, the book, I think it's called Water, Electricity, it's the Alan Hall book. Yeah, mentions about the old farmer who is actually doing this amazing sounding when he was stirring it, because as Steiner didn't just make it up, it was part of a very old tradition. And it's interesting that in my research having to do with the vortex labyrinths, that there are very amazing soundings that midwives would do in Ireland, that they were called GADR, and they would like sound going in and sound going out. So I think it's part of a very ancient.
I think so. And so once you've got it mixed, then you spray it. The manure you spray pretty much on the ground. The silica you spray in the atmosphere. There are other ones. There's one frankincense, gold, and myrrh that you mix on New Year's Eve, and then you spray it on the Epiphany on January 6th. That's for protection of it. And the other thing that I'm really not mentioning, of course, is that you're feeding what are called the elemental spirits, the subtle elements, the gnomes, the undines, the sylphs, and the salamanders, the fire, water, air, and earth spirits. And this is really, what you're feeding. You're feeding them to do, the spiritual work and to work, with you in forming the garden. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to conclude with a little reading from Alan. And I'll give you in case anybody wants a question. And in case you ever have any questions, this is my email. And Craig and I, we're happy to answer any other further questions. Therefore, you must perceive that when, as a destiny as a gardener, as a horticulturist, you're putting your hand into paradise and taking the secrets through seed, which are a participle of your relationship to the horoscope also, that you are bringing to this world a gift that only you can bring out of paradise into this world. What secrets are these that you possess, each individual of us? What incomprehensible secrets? This is where all the great and beautiful fruit trees, and forest trees, and garden trees, and shrubs, and flowers, and vegetables, and grasses, and cereals have all been born from. They didn't come through a ministry of agriculture. They never came certainly through a commercial seed nursery, for they had no such attribute of focus. They are brought by the will of angels through an individual, because he was an artist in the performance of his destiny in paradise on earth. And these things then had excellent nutriment, and they were growing in fertile soil, and the soil was produced fertilistically, and the whole attribute of focus was one of beatific. So it's like there's nobody who talks this way about gardening. So thank you for your attention. Sorry. Good. Sorry, you want a question?
Do you use a field broadcaster?
Do I do a what?
Use a field broadcaster.
No, I'm not even sure what that is.
Pipe. 10-foot pipe goes you down, you put your BD.
No. No, we don't have, our place isn't that big. We only have a few acres that we do. Yeah.
You don't need the plastic.
Yeah. Thanks. Sorry.
Can I use any part of this system on an apartment balcony?
Say again?
Can I use any part of the system on an apartment balcony?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do whatever on whatever level you want to do it. That'd be good. She wants to know if you can do it on a balcony, on a small scale. And I would say, Craig, wouldn't you, if you're going to start with something, would you start with like the Maria Thun compost or something, or one of the basic compost things if you're using a real small scale?
At a real small scale, I would start with the barrel compost that Hugh sells at Josephine Porter, or the Pfeiffer compost starter.
Okay.
On a good basis.
Okay, so those are the pre-potentizers, means they're partly digested and stirred, and you don't have to.
All the preparations are in each of those recipes.
Right. yeah, so that's a great place to start on a small scale, and then, you know, even with a couple of plants, you can get a few neighbors involved. You know, that stuff will go, you know, a fairly long way, depending on how much you've got going. Anything else? I guess have a break, and then.
It should be used within a certain period of time. It's not like you can, once you publicize it, that you can keep it for days.
Right. Use about.
Within an hour.
I think an hour is the standard, right? Of after it's stirred. Yeah, use it within an hour.
About 30 seconds for storage. This might be important because after they buy them, they go home, something very practical. Okay, 501, the silica. It'll be there. Thank you. Look like that. It'll be a bag with white silica powder in it. Get your window in the sun, as long as you want. The manure package, the package that comes with the manure, cool, dry, dark place, and I know that's a tall order. But what I do with them is I find a nice place in my kitchen with the drawer, bottom, it stays cool and doesn't get humid.
Yeah.
That'll keep for a while.
And away from outlets and electricity and things like that.
And then with that, you can apply all your French anesthesia, biogeometry concepts to that. You know, nice gold L by the, and the Agnihotra prep, which Steve didn't have time to get to, is 508. And that's a package of dry plant. You should have a problem to store it all. You can put that probably just in the drawer when you're out. Wait, yes. So be very practical about it. You know, think through these things about where you want to place your storage of preps. And if you can, look at your cycle of time and when they're supposed to be done. 501's done at dawn, 500's done at dusk, and then look at your cyclic time of the year. And when you order, you know, just put it on your calendar. I need to do this then, this then. And if you focus and get a plan beforehand, the biodynamic preparation placement on a piece of property is simple, and it doesn't take a lot of time.
And Josephine Porter Institute website has a lot of really good resources. For those of you who spot the stuff here, we printed out some of their materials. They have like a frequently asked questions page, and also they do a really nice thing on the timing for the summer months. So I think we have June through August, the best time to do different things. What's the best time to different times? So we've got those handouts if you're interested.
Also, if I can just say, we here in this community are so grateful of the length of time all of this has taken, the work that Craig has done in terms of harvesting material from his actual presence with Alan Chadwick at where he was actually taking it, and also all the work that Chris and Claire and Steve did for this book to actually come out. So it's very monumental that all of this is with us now.